Tannisho, Passages Deploring Deviations of Faith, by Yenbo. Forward. When I reflect with deep humility upon the past and the present, I cannot help but deplore the prevalence of various deviations from the true faith transmitted by word of mouth from our late Master. So I feel concerned about possible doubts that may arise in the minds of future inheritors of the faith. Unless guided by a karmically related teacher, how could anyone expect to enter the gate of easy practice? Nobody should defile the doctrine of the other power by his own arbitrary interpretations. Therefore, I have recorded here the gist of what the late Shinran Shonin told me, while it still reverberates in my ears. This has been written solely to clear away in advance any uncertainties that might arise among fellow devotees. So much by way of forward. 1. At the very moment when we are moved to utter the Nembutsu by a firm faith that our rebirth in the Pure Land is attained solely by virtue of the unfathomable working of Amita's original vow, we are enabled to share in its benefits that embrace all and forsake none. We should realize that Amita's original vow never discriminates between the old and the young, the good and the evil, and that what matters most is the heart of faith alone. For the vow was originally made for the purpose of delivering sentient beings sorely defiled by their vices and passions. Therefore, once faith in the original vow is steadfast, no other good is needed, for there is no good superior to the Nembutsu. No evil should be feared, for there is no evil powerful enough to obstruct Amita's original vow. 2. Your earnest aim in coming all the way here to see me, crossing more than 10 provinces at the risk of your lives, is solely to inquire of me the way to rebirth in the land of supreme bliss. Nevertheless, should you honor me by supposing that I am withholding any esoteric way for rebirth in the Pure Land, or that I know of scriptural sources other than the Nembutsu, you go seriously astray. Should you harbor such ideas, then there are a number of authoritative scholars in Nara, the southern capital, as well as on Mount High, the northern peak, whom you should visit and ask to your heart's content about the essentials for rebirth in the Pure Land. For me, Shinran, there is no alternative but to accept and trust in the teaching of my master Honen, that simply by uttering the Nembutsu, I shall be given deliverance by Amita. Is the Nembutsu really the seed of rebirth in the Pure Land, or is it a karmic cause of falling into the lowest hell? Of such questions I know absolutely nothing. Even if I had been deceived by my master, Honen Shonin, and were to fall into hellish torment, I would have no regrets at all. The reason is that, had I been one who was certain to attain Buddhahood by striving at some other spiritual discipline, and yet fell into an infernal state through uttering the Nembutsu, I might well be justified in regretting that I have been deceived. But as I find myself totally incapable of any kind of meritorious deed, the lowest hell would in any event be my destined abode. If Amita's original vow is unfailing, then Sakyamuni's teaching cannot be false. If Sakyamuni's teaching is true, then Shantao's sacred commentaries cannot be unfounded. If Shantao's commentaries are well-founded, how can Honen Shonin's sayings be in error? If Honen Shonin's sayings are trustworthy, how then can what I, Shinran, am telling you be in vain? Summing up, such are the humble convictions of my ignorant self. Beyond this, it depends entirely on each of you as to whether you adopt and trust the Nembutsu or cast it aside. 3. Quote, even a virtuous person can attain rebirth in the Pure Land. How much more easily a wicked person? But ordinary people usually say, quote, even a wicked person can attain rebirth in the Pure Land. How much more easily a virtuous person? At first sight, this view may appear more reasonable, but it really is quite contrary to the intention of the other power of the original vow. The reason is that since a person who does deeds of merit by his own effort lacks total reliance on the other power, he is self-excluded from Amita's original vow. But as soon as his attitude of self-effort is redirected and he dedicates himself exclusively to the other power, his rebirth in the true land of reward is at once assured. It was solely to enable the wicked to attain Buddhahood that Amita took his vows out of compassion for those like us who, defiled to the core, have no hope of liberating ourselves from the cycle of birth and death through any other discipline. And so, an evil person who dedicates himself to the other power is above all endowed with the right cause for rebirth. Hence, Shinran saying, quote, even a virtuous person can attain rebirth in the Pure Land. How much more so easily a wicked person? 4. There is a divergence between the compassion of the path of sages and that of the path of the Pure Land. The compassion of the path of sages commiserates with and cares for sentient beings, and yet it is least likely to succeed in liberating them as completely as could be wished. But the true compassion of the Pure Land path consists in calling the Nembutsu, thereby quickly attaining Buddhahood, and then benefiting all sentient beings with the heart of great compassion and kindness as fully as possible. Because, as you know, no matter how much sympathy and pity we may feel for others in this life, it is difficult to save them as we would wish. Our compassion is not thoroughgoing, and so the calling of the Nembutsu is the only all-embracing expression of the heart of great compassion. 5. I, Shinran, have never called a Nembutsu, not even once, out of filial piety for my deceased parents. The reason is that through karmic relations during numberless rebirths, all sentient beings are or have been my parents or kinsmen. So we should attain Buddhahood in the next life, and then we shall be able to bring deliverance to all other beings. If the Nembutsu were a deed of merit that could be done by our own efforts, we could deliver our parents by transferring that merit to them. But this being impossible, only if we abandon our self-efforts and straightway attain enlightenment in the Pure Land will the Buddha Amita's superhuman powers and skillful means enable us to deliver first all of those whom we are closely related to by karmic ties, but who find themselves afflicted by suffering in any of the 6 realms of existence and the 4 modes of birth. 6. It is unbelievable that any dispute should have arisen among those who devote themselves to the exclusive practice of the Nembutsu as to who are my disciples and who are the disciples of others. I, Shinran, do not have a single disciple of my own. The reason is that if I could induce others to call the Nembutsu through my own influence, then they might well be called my disciples. But it is utterly absurd to call them my disciples when they repeat the Nembutsu through the influence of Amita Buddha. When karmic conditions are favorable, master and disciple must meet. When adverse, they must part. Despite this, there are those who disconcert the faithful by saying that if they desert their present master and repeat the Nembutsu while following some other master, their rebirth in the Pure Land can never be attained. At this, words fail me. Do they mean that they wish to revoke the faith called forth by Amita Buddha as though it were their own? I reiterate that this view must never be allowed to prevail. Once we are in harmony with the spontaneous power of the vow, we naturally come to realize our indebtedness to Amita Buddha and feel gratitude toward our teachers. 7. The Nembutsu is the one unobstructed path. This is because the gods of heaven and earth bow down in reverence before the devotee of the true faith, but he can never be hindered by the realm of demons or by adherence to heterodox views. No evil deed can bring upon him the retribution of karma, nor can any good deed that he might do surpass the Nembutsu. Hence, I call this the one unobstructed path. 8. For the devotee, the calling of the Nembutsu is neither religious observance nor moral worthiness. It is not a religious observance because it is not done by his own design. It is not a moral deed, since it is none of his own doing. As it springs wholly from the other power and surpasses all self-effort, I say that, for the devotee, the calling of the Nembutsu is neither religious observance nor moral worthiness. 9. Even when I call the Nembutsu, I rarely feel like dancing for joy, nor do I have any fervent longing to be reborn in the Pure Land. Why is this so? I asked. There was once a time when I, Shinran, also had doubts on this question. Now, Yenbo, I find you sharing the same doubts. But when I reflect on this more deeply, I realize that our rebirth in the Pure Land is all the more assured because we cannot feel like dancing for joy as we would wish. That is how you should think of this problem. It is defilement by evil passions that oppresses our hearts and prevents us from rejoicing. But since Amita Buddha, knowing this already, has called us, quote, common beings defiled by ignorance, I realize that the compassionate vow of the other power was made for the benefit of just such defiled beings as ourselves, and so I feel it all the more worthy of trust. Moreover, when we have no longing to be reborn instantly in the Pure Land, if we fall even slightly ill, we feel helpless with the fear of death. This is likewise because of our evil passions. How strong indeed must they be when we find it so hard to leave our native land of suffering, where we have been wandering through birth and death for numberless kalpas, and when we can feel no longing for Amita's Pure Land, where we have yet to be reborn. We are reborn into that land when we have exhausted, even though reluctantly, our karmic relations to this world of suffering and end our lives helplessly. So Amita pities above all those who feel no urgent longing to go to the Pure Land. Reflecting on this, we realize all the more how trustworthy is Amita's great compassionate vow, and how firmly our rebirth is assured. If, on the contrary, our hearts were to rejoice with an eager aspiration for rebirth in the Pure Land, we might believe that we had no evil passions at all. 10. The meaning of the Nembutsu lies in its freedom from contrivance, because it is imponderable, indescribable, and inconceivable, the Master said.